Welcome to episode 1 of The Generalist. A few notes before we begin. Firstly, thank you so much for checking out our podcasts. It's not the best quality in the world, but it's not bad. Every episode after this gets increasingly better, and we plan on getting it better and better as we go, and we get more comfortable with the equipment and all this stuff. So thank you for bearing with any inconsistencies in sound or anything of that sort. In this episode, before I start, I'm going to give a short history of Gautama Buddha. If you're not interested in listening to that, go ahead and feel free to skip straight to the interview. You won't miss anything other than the story of Gautama Buddha. If you already know it, might as well skip it. If you like the show, please rate us on iTunes. Donate to the show so that we can increase the quality and amount of episodes. We will start by just releasing one every 2 weeks. Hopefully, at some point, we'll be able to release one every week. Check out our website at www.thegeneralistpodcast.com. Send me suggestions or comments by email to thegeneralistpodcast@gmail.com. Have fun. Today I sat down with my friend Dan Flegging, who is a Buddhist who has previously taken refuge in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery, and he has also trained under the tracker Dan Brown in the art of tracking and wilderness survival. Enjoy, and see you next episode. Welcome to The Generalist, a show with a man who knows very little bit about a lot. A man who specializes in nothing in particular. A man who knows that he knows nothing. A man who can be described as non-specific. And to top it off, he narrates his own intros. This is The Generalist with your host, Saul Ackerman. Legend has it, around 500 to 300 BC, a man was born and was given the name Siddhartha Gautama. He was the son of a king and a queen in the area which today we call southern Nepal. It is said that he was able to speak and understand from the moment he was born. His father called in a seer to find out what this meant, and the seer told him that his son would grow to either be a king or a great sage who would save the world. His father decided he wanted his son to be a king, and he went about making a plan, and the plan was to keep him away from any sort of suffering that any normal human would have. So, he never allowed him to see any elderly people. He was always to be surrounded by beauty and youth. He got married by the time he was 16, but as any person would, he eventually wished to leave the palace and see the world. His father obliged, and once again planned. He was to visit outside the palace, but only the youth, the healthy, would be allowed to see him. As fate would have it, 2 elderly men wandered across the path of Siddhartha, and when they did, Siddhartha followed, to encounter a camp of sickly and elderly people, where he saw for the first time a man die. Turning to his aide, he asked what this was, and naturally they had to explain it to him. All men die. All men age. All men suffer. This must have blown Siddhartha's mind, and so he decided he was going to go explore the world, leaving his wife and his young son behind. He began to explore. He studied with ascetics. He studied with gurus. He took paths of extreme pain, such as not eating, not bathing, not sleeping. But none of these paths led him to the answers he looked for. After years of study, one day, meditating under a fig tree, Siddhartha was enlightened. After a few years, he began to teach what he had learned to others, and his teachings spread across the entire world. In his language, Siddhartha was dubbed the Enlightened One, and his teachings called the Middle Way. Today, we know him as Buddha, and his teachings, Buddhism. Welcome to my studio.
Take a seat.
Right?
I love that you I love you did this. This is so I can't spit all over the microphone, right?
Yeah. I hear you perfectly well. I'm just hearing you through here. There's more scotch if you want it. Welcome to the Generalist.
Whoa.
Thanks for coming, man.
Hey. To the Generalist.
To the Generalist.
Hey, kitty.
The first recording.
Oh, are you actually recording right now?
Yeah, we're recording right now.
I was just listening to an audiobook on the way over.
About?
It's a Chogyam Trungpa, the Tibetan Buddhist monk guy.
Which is actually the subject I was interested in talking to you about. So talk to me a little bit.
Well,
first of all, what got
the master of the tie-in right here, the segue.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Yeah. Well, not now that I've pointed it out, but
right, but nonetheless.
Well, the book is called Smile at Fear. I've been having a lot of anxiety and a lot of panic and fear over the past couple of years, so I've wanted to get into Chogyam Trungpa for a while because I'm a big fan of his student Pema Chodron. So I listened to a couple of his books, but this one really got me the most because I feel like something that I really want to practice when I get my acupuncture license is treating people for depression and anxiety because I think a lot of people suffer from it.
Yeah, so for you guys who don't know, and I'll probably say this at the beginning of the episode, but Dan is trained to be an acupuncturist and is a practicing Tibetan Buddhist. Is that fair to say, a practicing Tibetan Buddhist?
I don't actually like to say that because that makes me sound like somebody who takes Tibetan Buddhism super seriously, and it's the only religion I ever officially joined on my own volition. Right. But after a couple years of studying and practicing and then reading Chogyam Trungpa, I feel like I'm totally comfortable calling myself a Buddhist. I'm actually even a little uncomfortable calling myself that, but I think Tibetan Buddhism is kind of just for Tibetans at this point.
How so?
Buddhism has a history of every time it goes to a new country, it takes on a new form. So for me to attach to Tibetan Buddhism and be like, oh, I'm a Tibetan Buddhist, it's kind of like I'm just trying to do that stereotypical white guy thing where I just I don't have a culture, I'm going to take this one. And I don't really feel like I didn't grow up in Tibet. I don't speak Tibetan. I'm not immersed in their rituals.
Yeah, at the same time, you do follow the principles of Tibetan Buddhism.
But the principles of Tibetan Buddhism are just Buddhism. So that's why saying Tibetan Buddhism is
So why is there this separation?
Because Buddhism took on a very, unique and interesting form in Tibet. And then when I guess the Dalai Lama became kind of popular over here, it became kind of like a fad.
So do you think that the type of Buddhism that is talked about in the West more in a layman type is more the Tibetan type? Or?
No, it's actually more, I feel like it's more like just very old school Indian.
Really?
Yeah.
So if you can, if you happen to know this, give us a bit of history. I know it starts with Siddhartha Gautama, then Mahayana comes about after a few hundred years.
First is Hinayana.
All right, so tell us. All
right, so I'm not a Buddhist scholar, but this is my understanding. And for anybody who wants to learn a lot about Buddhism, there are plenty of good books out there. A good audio book that's a good intro to Tibetan Buddhism, but Buddhism in general, is The Jewel Tree of Tibet by Robert Thurman, who is Uma Thurman's dad, and he's also the preeminent Indo-Tibetan Buddhist scholar in the country, apparently, or something like that. So anyway, anything I say is you're completely welcome to tell me I'm wrong because I'm not a scholar officially. This is just a hobby.
Well, I won't tell you I'm wrong because most of the Buddhism that I know comes from you. At least I'm speaking in the general.
To
the world.
Yeah. Anybody who manages to find this podcast and listen to it and really gets annoyed about all the inconsistencies that I'm about to say.
That's fair.
They can totally ream me out and I'll be more than happy to learn. So Buddhism starts in India, and the way that Robert Thurman kind of tells the story is that once Siddhartha becomes enlightened, at first he has no desire to teach anybody because he's like, how's anybody even going to understand this? And really, what's the point? Because if you're enlightened, it's kind of like, oh, well, everything is as it should be. And so, what if I go around saying, listen, you got to hear what I got to tell you, that's kind of like saying that things are not right and that things are not how they should be, and it's almost like you going around correcting something when there's nothing to correct. But then part of what comes along with being enlightened is the realization that you are connected to everybody else and that everything is sort of this process that's happening all at the same time together, and that there is no independent origination, which is
there's an interesting thing about that because I think it's a difficult idea for the Western mind to get used to.
because what I see a lot is you get the people who are like, oh yeah, there's a collective consciousness and everything is one, but they don't really have a way of explaining it or making it understandable. And I listen, as you know, to a lot of Alan Watts, and he has a really good way of explaining it. And what he says is, and this is just one example of the many ways that he puts it. One that I really like has to do with the bees and flowers, where bees need flowers to exist and flowers need bees to exist.
Yeah.
So in that sense, even though they are separate things in our eyes, they're really part of the same thing, and that expands to everything, because we all need each other. Nothing exists without the context of everything around that. Yeah. Is that a fair explanation of that?
It's pretty much exactly what it is. It's like, a lot of people have an idea of Buddhism as kind of a almost like nihilistic philosophy, because there's, a lot of it comes from translation, unfortunately. It's like...
What, the nihilism, you mean?
Yeah, because they say things like, everything's like an illusion or whatever. Is like a common idea that some people who don't know a lot about Buddhism have. And so those people wind up believing that like the world is not real and that none of this is real and it's all just like some kind of like matrix thing. And it's not really saying that. It's just saying that like you are not an independent thing. Like you exist because of everything else around you and everything's connected. So it's not independent, it's interdependent.
That's a great way to put it. I like that.
It's not my... Yeah, that's not my... the Karmapa, the 17th Karmapa, who is the current head of one of the major schools of Tibetan Buddhism, talks about that a lot.
Well, it's yours now.
What? Oh, thanks. Thank you. Yes, the interdependence is a concept I once formed. No. So yeah, it doesn't mean that you don't exist. It just means that you're not this independent thing that's separate from everything else. So anyway, eventually Gautama Buddha he starts to teach people, and this monastic system springs up eventually after a while. And originally it was what's called Hinayana, which means small vehicle or lesser vehicle, and it was all about becoming enlightened. Like, I'm going to become enlightened, and it's about you. And then eventually, what happens because of the realization that like when you become enlightened, you realize that you're connected to everybody else, and everybody else is suffering, so therefore their suffering is your suffering. So why would you not want to also help them stop suffering? Right. Because you've had this realization that everything's a certain way, but they don't know that, and they're suffering because of ignorance, and they're caught in these cycles. So why would you not want to go help them? And that's kind of how Mahayana, which means the greater vehicle, formed. And the way that Robert Thurman talks about it is as a sort of omnipotent being, not omnipotent, but
what is
omniscient? Maybe.
Like understands everything.
Yeah, he is able to sort of plant things for like future use, like when people are ready for it. So he would leave and they have this concept in Tibetan Buddhism too of, I think they call them treasure teachings or something.
Okay.
They're like hidden teachings that people would discover. They're called Tertons or Turgons or something like that. They're monks or siddhas who are kind of like independent yogis who don't have a sect. They come across these teachings either in meditation and like a enlightened being comes to them, or they're like walking past a place and like whatever enlightened being was there before like left implanted like a teaching.
Like in a literal physical place?
It could be that, or it could be like they kind of program it so that like that teaching is meant to be discovered at a certain time. And that's when it gets all mystical and magical.
No, I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I could hear when I'm drinking the scotch and the ice falls back in. That's why I'm smiling like an idiot.
The Generalist, brought to you by alcohol.
Brought to you by alcohol. Anyway, yeah, you were saying.
So anyway, the way that Robert Thurman talks about it is that these teachings were it was planned this way, because if you automatically have it so that people are expecting to become enlightened for the benefit of everybody, it's kind of like certain societies may not be ready for that. That's kind of like a very evolved thought process of like people wanting to do things for other people and not for themselves. So the way that evolved was Hinayana, Mahayana, and then there were the secret vehicle or diamond vehicle, which was Vajrayana, which are these very like esoteric things, which a lot of Tibetan Buddhism has to do with. A lot of with the mantras and the sadhana practices and the visualizations of various deities and things like that.
Did the Tibetan Buddhists
start that?
Write the Vajrayana?
No, so that's okay. So this is why Tibet is kind of cool, because Indian society at some point took on this Buddhist mantle, and they were a very like Buddhist society, and like the monks were a very important part of society, and there were these like colleges, like I think Nalanda is the name of it. Nalanda was this like Buddhist university where like all the Buddhist scholars would go, and it was like, you know, this kind of like almost like an Atlantean utopia kind of thing. The way that Robert Thurman talks about this is that when a society gets to that point, they become very advanced, but they also become very gentle, and so they're easily overcome.
That makes sense.
And what happens is naturally the teaching will then like migrate somewhere else, and Vajrayana scholars and whatnot would, being wise, would see this coming from a mile off and say like, well, we got to get these teachings somewhere. We got to take them somewhere.
So do you think there's some wisdom in the idea of, sure, being enlightened and having all this wisdom, but also having a way to defend yourself? Or
like martially?
Yeah, I mean, part of the issue, I think, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, is that you get these societies that are enlightened and are very wise, and therefore are very gentle, then they get conquered by some other less wise society.
Because they lose their taste for, you know, imperialism and expansion and conquering things.
Right. I guess my question boils down to, is there something wrong in self-defense from that perspective? Because you go, okay, I'm very wise, but I want to spread this idea. Or perhaps ideas, I don't want to spread the idea at all. It doesn't matter. If it comes, then I'll spread it. And if it doesn't come, then I won't.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that idea. I think just in the case of India, it didn't happen.
I see.
Yeah. Like, China has like a really rich tradition of people who are like super Buddhist and could also beat the shit out of you.
Yeah.
And same thing in Japan. Same thing in probably where else? I don't think Tibet had much of a. Tibet did have like a warrior culture, but that kind of also it kind of went the way like India went. It kind of like faded out. There were no real like. I know that there were like Lamaist monasteries where people would learn martial arts, but I think a lot of those were in China. I don't think a lot of those were like in Tibet.
Right.
Tibet pretty much, the way that it kind of works, or I should say worked, was that Tibet was pretty warlike, and there were lots of like warring tribes, and it was very like the way that India was before Buddha came along. But they sort of, because they were on this plateau and they were kind of isolated, once they like filled up that plateau and there was like one unifying sort of government or however it was run, they kind of like relaxed a little, they kind of chilled out. And then at that same time, India was starting to decline. And I'm, again, not a history buff when it comes to this stuff. Robert Thurman, I'm literally going from like the memory of listening to this audiobook a couple times, but it was really interesting, so hopefully I remembered it well.
Yeah, you gotta check it out.
It's good. At that point, Tibet was like basically ripe for the teachings. You know, it was like Vajrayana masters who would go to Tibet and literally and figuratively sort of subdue the shamanic kind of nature, spirit worshipping entities and people and rulers and teach them the Dharma. Like Padmasambhava, who is like one of the more well-known and very important figures in Tibetan Buddhism, who is considered by a lot of people to be like Buddha number 2.
Yeah. What's his name? Say it again.
Padmasambhava. They call him Guru Rinpoche.
Is he considered a bodhisattva?
Yeah, he's a bodhisattva. He was also, I guess, what you would call...
And to clarify, bodhisattva is somebody who has attained enlightenment but decided to stay in this world.
Well, there are like degrees of enlightenment in Buddhism. Full enlightenment would be like passing into nirvana, like Buddha did. And bodhisattvas don't actually go all the way. They could, but they choose not to.
Interesting. I was listening to a podcast where they were interviewing Lama Surya Das. Have you heard of him?
Mm-hmm.
And he mentioned that in the scriptures, there's some mention by Siddhartha Gautama that there is such thing as nirvana while remaining alive. What's that about?
I don't know. I've never actually heard. I don't think I've ever really heard people.
It was really quickly mentioned. He didn't go into it, so I was wondering if you could enlighten. But
that was an actual thing that Buddha said.
That's what it sounded like he was saying. I could be misunderstanding though.
It's tough. There's so much Buddhist writing.
Of course, I'm
like
sure.
The Bible is long, and you know there's the Torah, and then there's
a Torah, then you have Tanakh, which is Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim.
All right.
So that's the Torah. Then there's the Navi books, and then there's the Ketuvim books, which come later, and then you have the Mishnahs, and then you have the Gemaras, which build on that, and then you have the Shulchan Aruch, and there's a lot of writing. And Jews like to talk.
There's a lot of commentary. A lot of
there's
it's commentary.
A lot of commentary.
It's the same thing with Buddhism. Like, you can have... There's something called the Tipitaka, which is like all of the official Buddhist writings, and it's like, something like 12,000 pages of stuff or something like that.
Really
it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And there's and it's organized in these it's organized in these levels. One thing that's interesting about Buddhism is it's very specific and very clear, the writings. There's a lot of things which are like, this is this, nor not this, nor not this and this, nor not this, nor this. It's like very the language is they're trying to be extra clear about stuff, and there's so many writings and there's so many commentaries. I'm not really sure how much of it is actually from the mouth of Buddha, but I do know that the Dhammapada is supposed to be the one book that is from Buddha's mouth to a piece of paper.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's a great one. Anybody who wants to get into Buddhism, that's a really good place to start.
I imagine that's the text. Is that...
I don't know.
Is it fair to say that's the Bible of Buddhism, or is that too crazy of a statement to say when it comes to Buddhism?
I think it's just there's too much writing out there for that to be the thing. And Buddhism was never supposed to be systematized because of what we were saying before. Every time it hits a new country, it has to take on a new form in order to make sense to the people in that area. If you look at Japanese Buddhism, it's very Japanese. It's it's very sparse and clean and organized.
Is Japanese Buddhism Zen Buddhism, or are there other forms as well?
There are probably other forms.
But that's the main one.
Zen comes from China originally.
Yeah, Chan Buddhism.
Chan. But yeah, I mean, Zen is Zen. Japanese Zen is even different from Chinese Zen. And,
I would imagine.
Chinese Buddhism resembles a lot of Taoism, and it also resembles Hinduism.
Yeah, I understand that Chan Buddhism is a mixture of Buddhism and Taoism.
That makes sense.
Which I find fascinating.
It makes sense because, Japanese Shinto is pretty Taoist. And so when you have Buddhism...
Really? Japanese Shinto is very Taoist?
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about Shinto. I need to find a Shintoist.
I think, and this is not to gloss over Shinto at all, but it kind of just reminds me of lots of
Stop it!
Saul's cat is attacking his feet, and he's trying desperately not to yell. What's really going on is that Bella is actually a reincarnated Zen master, and she's trying to teach Saul something right now. But we'll see if Saul figures it out.
That might be the case. Son of a bitch. Right. We were talking about Shinto.
A lot of indigenous cultures, they really have a very close connection to nature, and a lot of it is just about the spirits within various animals, plants, rocks, water, air,
Yeah, that's the understanding that I have of it.
Which is very Taoist.
Yeah, that's true.
Taoism is kind of like Chinese shamanism. So
I think that's fair. I'm a huge fan of Taoism. I love
it's awesome. I love it too. And so when Buddhism hit that country, it was it fits very, very easily because there's nothing in Buddhism that conflicts with the idea of going along with nature.
Right.
I think some people have an idea that Buddhism is about transcending reality, but it's really just about removing all of the extra stuff that stands between you and perceiving reality directly.
Now, I do have understood that you can have that, of course, but I think let me rephrase that whole thing.
Yeah.
I think
because do have understood is not a sentence.
No?
I mean, you can challenge me on that one if you like. Brought to you by Scotch.
Maybe Scotch is not the best thing to serve.
Next week's episode brought to you by water.
Fuck, what were we even talking about?
Oh, wow. You were talking about Taoism.
Yeah, and Shinto. And I don't know what I was going to ask you before, but I was really interested in asking you in terms of the more esoteric. Do you do any of that?
I have. Yes. Yes is the short answer. There are rituals and what they call sadhanas. A sadhana, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm sorry. I think I am. It's basically a practice. It's like a ritual. There's chanting involved. There's within the practice itself, there's moments where you you pause and you meditate, and you're following along this text, and you're chanting it, and there are spots where you'll also stop and say a mantra over and over again, and you can say that as many times as you want. And the idea behind these sadhanas is that it's kind of like a combination between a prayer, a meditation, and like an affirmation.
Prayer in the Western sense?
Yeah, you're like, the idea with these like Tibetan, what they call deities, they're not actually deities. They're not like gods that are separate. I mean, they maybe at one point were a person who then became a bodhisattva, and as a bodhisattva, when you transcend your individual consciousness, it allows you to do certain things that you could not do as like a simple basic human. It doesn't make you like a god or omnipotent or anything. It just, yeah, it's complicated because it, you know, in the West we have Christianity, we have Judaism, and all those Abrahamic religions, and there's a lot of like entities and like angels and demons, and those things are like really different in the East. And so like there's these ideas, there's a lot of ideas about like people who attain certain abilities and levels of consciousness in like China and in India and Japan and Tibet. There's like this idea that you can like do a certain practice and get to a point where you like transcend your like basic humanity, and a bodhisattva is kind of like that. So a lot of these deities are actually, they could be a demon that was maybe converted to Buddhism and then gained certain abilities and became like a protector spirit.
Interesting.
There are ones that were like human and then attained a certain level of enlightenment, and then maybe even they, because they no longer occupy a single localized physical body, they split off into like different things. So it's actually one person, but they become all these different things. Like, this is why I don't call myself a Tibetan Buddhist, because I've never experienced these things, and I'm not from that culture, so I'm not gonna just like.
How does that translate into the everything is one idea?
I don't know. I'm not wise enough to answer that, I don't think.
Well, I wouldn't say you're not wise enough.
Oh, stop it. Yeah, that's too hard. I don't know.
That's fair. Is Tibetan Buddhism one that delves more into this esoteric
Yeah,
stuff,
there's a lot of... I think because, okay, so before Buddhism got to Tibet, there was this, like Shinto, it was called Bun.
Bun?
Yeah, B-O-N, but it's the O with the two dots above it. But it's not bone.
So it's German.
They had a lot of Germans in Tibet before the Chinese got there. No. And that was like a shamanic kind of culture. It was like very nature worshipy. It was very similar to, I guess... There were aspects of Taoism to it because they had like elements, the way the Chinese have like 5 elements. They had elements, but it was much more about like worshiping spirits and the ancestors, and it was like a kind of like a lot of human spiritual traditions before organized religion. It was very just like nature oriented, Do
you find any? I haven't said this before, but you're a tracker. You studied with Tom. What was his last name?
Tom Brown.
Tom Brown, you studied tracking with him,
mm-hmm.
and he does a lot of Native American stuff, correct?
He actually I guess that's accurate to a degree, but wow, we're gonna get really off topic if I go into this. You sure you want to go there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Let's fuck around. But you could always come back and talk more about Tibetan Buddhism.
Okay, we'll be back to Bond in a minute.
Well, the reason I asked before we get off topic, and we will get off topic, was because do you find a similarity between the Native American stuff that you learned through Tom
mm-hmm.
versus this Bun stuff that you're talking about?
I think all of those like pre-organized religion, tribal culture, spirituality, whatever you want to call them, they were all really similar. It was all about spirits of nature, everything having like a soul, like the spirit of the rocks, the spirit of the wind, the spirit of the sun. There wasn't much of like a religion to it. It was just like, this is how things are.
Right.
And there were lots of spirits and very superstitious and mystical, and I love that stuff. But a lot of what happens with spirituality is like with Buddhism, it worked its way into Tibet, and then it encountered that Tibetan version of that native belief structure, and that belief structure and Buddhism kind of like merged. And that's where Tibetan Buddhism comes from. Just the way, like we were saying, like with with Japan,
right?
Buddhism plus Shinto equals Zen.
So here's something I'm very unclear on. Tibet is a part of China,
mm-hmm.
but is it influenced by mainstream Chinese thought, Taoism, Confucianism, that sort of stuff? Or has it always been its own separate thing?
I think that this is where my knowledge of Tibetan history gets really fuzzy. But I've talked to a couple people about this. Somebody that you should definitely have on here, Mr. Jason Ginsburg.
I will. That guy is 10 times the generalist that I'll ever be.
He's definitely got a lot to say about Tibetan history and Chinese history because they're so interrelated. But I will say that Tibetan monks at various points in Chinese history were very important to the Chinese emperor. They were seen as like incredibly wise, and they were like kept close to the emperor as like advisors. And
is this pre or post Buddhism?
This is after Buddhism.
So they're Buddhist Tibetan monks.
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't know that at all.
Lamas. Yeah,
that's so cool. I had no idea.
Yeah,
and
there is a difference between monks and lamas, by the way.
Oh, tell me.
A lama is somebody who studies a lot. I think a lot of the esoteric stuff. Like, if you're a monk, that means like you live in the monastery, and you're like staying.
I mean, I figured there was a difference. But I just thought that a lama was somebody who had attained a certain level within the Tibetan Buddhist ranks.
Well, that is true. You could be a lama without being a monk, and you could be a monk without being a lama, or you could be both.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
I think that I'm pretty sure that's how it functions, because I know that there are lamas out there who do not live in monasteries anymore, and they live completely normal lives. They just went through this training. It's almost like Jedi training. To be completely, like, I'm not even exaggerating. It's a lot like that.
Tell me more. This sounds cool.
Like, so I know, like, the monastery that I took refuge in. Taking refuge is the sort of, if Buddhism was to be considered like a religion, taking refuge is the closest thing to like being baptized that there is, or what would it be in Judaism?
I don't know that there's a...
Like, okay, now you're Jewish. Like, what's the moment?
There really isn't, other than, like, in the males, the Brit, which is cutting off the foreskin, but... And I guess the bar mitzvah, but there's no real,
bar mitzvah
like,
is more like you're a man.
In Judaism, if you're Jewish, you're fucked. You're there.
In Judaism, it's like
fuck it.
Welcome to Earth.
Jewish,
sorry.
You're fucked.
Welcome to Earth. Sorry.
Exactly.
You're Jewish.
Here's 613 laws you need to follow.
Now get out there. So yeah, I took refuge at this monastery, and you can enter into like a 3-year like Lama training program, and you go and you like put everything behind you, like you let go of everything in your life. You go and you live at this monastery. You sleep like 4 hours a day, sitting up straight. You sleep like in a box, like in a meditating posture. You spend like hours and hours a day doing like the practices, and when you're done, you're a lama, which means not really sure what, but lama translates into teacher, so that means you're a teacher of some kind.
See, I didn't know that.
It's like rabbi, you know.
Yeah.
But you're not a monk, so you're not in like you've undergone the training, like the mind training, which is like a big part of Buddhism. It's like training your mind to function in a certain way that is kind of, in a lot of ways, it's like opposite to the way that we naturally function. It's like you learn how to negate your ego using mind training, and that's why I say it's like Jedi training, because it's about like learning how to.
But that's an interesting thing you say, because we've had conversations before, and not just in Buddhism but in other things, but especially you've told me this specifically, that in Tibetan Buddhism you're not trying to get rid of the ego, but rather you're trying to make friends with your ego. You
are trying to make friends with your ego. The reason that that's not talked about specifically in Tibetan Buddhism is that for whatever reason in Tibetan culture, people are already generally a lot more cool with themselves and like happy as like a human being and like friends with themselves. When monks would come to here to the West, they had to like add an extra layer onto the teachings, because they realized that so many people were like constantly at war with themselves and did not like themselves and were not cool with who they were, and like had this sort of almost like an extra layer of shit that they had to peel back.
You definitely find that in Western society, and I'm not saying that you don't find it in Eastern. I'm just haven't interacted enough to know. Yeah,
I think it just comes from whatever. It's a specific
having to perform.
I don't know where it comes from. It's just a Western thing that Eastern monks were very.
I feel like Zen Buddhists would say there is no ego.
Oh boy!
And not just Zen Buddhists, Taoists, other people would say there is no ego to begin with. You're trying to become friends. No, not become friends. You're trying to get rid of your ego, and there's no ego to be gotten rid of.
Well, your natural state is egolessness. So it's almost like you're just trying to remember something that you forgot.
Interesting.
It's like you're trying to, yeah. There's like it's almost like a little glitch, and you're just trying to like.
So
You know.
when you remember that thing you forgot, if you will, that's when you become a lama, or that's just part of the training.
That's enlightenment.
That's enlightenment.
Yeah, becoming a lama is a way to kind of like embody the teachings and help other people. The Tibetan Buddhism is very much Mahayana. It's very much about helping everybody. Tibetan culture is really cool because to be a monk in Tibet, not here, but like in Tibet, you know, they have that whole reincarnation. Reincarnation is like a big part of their culture, and they have the idea that like enlightened beings can decide to descend down into a body by choice, or somebody who was on their way to becoming enlightened, you know, in their next life, they're just going to continue that journey. Because even in traditional old school Buddhism, there's this concept of the stream enterer. If you as an individual achieve a certain level of enlightenment, it's almost like you've built up this momentum where now it's like a certainty it's going to happen, and it can happen in like one lifetime, or it can happen in like up to I think 7 lifetimes. But it's like you're like you're in the river, you're in the stream, you're being carried towards nirvana. Like there's no stopping it now.
Interesting. So once you're in that path, you're fucked. You're just going that way.
your ego's fucked. You're on the way.
You're just gonna be enlightened no matter what. You do.
No, you got no choice anymore. You're out of the. You've built up enough, or I should say, removed enough karma, where now the gears are turning, and there's like no.
Is a lama necessarily a bodhisattva?
The goal of any Buddhist is to become
A Buddha?
Well,
No.
yeah, to become like Buddha, but a bodhisattva is in Tibetan Buddhism anybody who that's a good question. Because I don't know if being a lama automatically guarantees you're going to become
A bodhisattva.
a bodhisattva. Anybody with the term Rinpoche, that's a term meaning precious one. That's somebody who has already achieved a certain degree of enlightenment, and that's somebody who's like going to come back and like keep coming back. Like Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who I was talking about before, he's a reincarnation. He's like from a line of, I guess, Trungpas or Chogyams. I forget which.
Okay.
But like the Karmapa or the Dalai Lama, those are all bodhisattvas who reincarnate continually, and they're actually considered emanations, which means that they are like earthly physical manifestations of like a super advanced high level being who can reincarnate into as many people as they wish at the same time.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So,
it gets really like
here's where it gets weird,
Yeah.
because I've always had the impression of Buddhism that it is not religious in nature in the same way that Western religions are religious. But a lot of the stuff that you're talking to me about makes me think of it more in that sense. It's like there's not just the Buddhist ideas, the removing of suffering and how to get rid of suffering and all that stuff, the Eightfold Path and so on and so forth, but you're adding all these levels of these guys can do this and these guys can do that, and it's starting to sound more like a religion
right.
than
Mm-hmm.
I'm used to.
It's almost like, comparison between Christianity and Catholicism. Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism is kind of like
You're not the first person I've heard say that.
It's a really good analogy, because in Tibetan Buddhism there's so many enlightened masters and saints and blah blah blah, and it's awesome. But that's why when Chogyam Trungpa came to the States, he didn't talk about that stuff. The Karmapa sent him here to share the Dharma, but he didn't come here to spread Tibetan culture.
So do you think a large part of what I'm calling more religious side of it, do you think that comes from the Bum, the
Bum?
Tibetan?
Yeah, totally. That's why Zen did really well here, because Zen is so devoid of all.
Yeah, Zen is very devoid of everything.
Right.
Of everything.
Yeah.
Zen is like there is nothing.
The Zen might as well not even exist, because that's
one of the main things with Zen, I feel like, is that people go, I have nothing to teach you,
right.
And they're not lying.
Right.
That's really what it is. They have nothing to teach you.
It's true. It's kind of like, you get to a certain level of whatever, and then I think it's a Zen saying that when I achieved perfect enlightenment, I achieved nothing special. It's something like that. It's this idea of like, we make such a big deal about enlightenment, and we get attached to it, which is very un-Buddhist. You get super attached to it, and you want to like cling to it and reach for it, and you're thinking of yourself as this like a very unenlightened creature who knows nothing, and you're reaching towards being a Buddha. And then, like, if you actually achieve that, then everything's just normal again.
Right.
You're just like, oh, here we
Yeah,
are.
it's funny. Alan Watts talks about a student, I think a friend of his, who is trying to attain enlightenment in Zen Buddhism, and he hasn't been able to figure it out. And he goes to his teacher. He as he's walking to his teacher, he finds a frog on the road, and he takes the frog and he puts it in the sleeve of his kimono, and he gets to the teacher, and the teacher goes, "What is enlightenment?" Or I don't know exactly what he asked, but one of those questions, and he goes, "Master, I am the same as this frog," and he puts out the frog. He's like, and the master looks at him and he goes, "Too intellectual. You're just saying shit. You don't understand it."
Yeah.
And I know you've been very into Zen, which leads me to the question: why have you chosen to go the Tibetan path versus the Zen path, or is it not two separate paths at all?
It's not. I was into Zen when I was a kid because I really liked Zen masters. I thought they were like hilarious and
yeah, they tend to be very funny.
They were really funny, and they also, like, when I was 13, 14, I started like getting really depressed and anxious, and I was like, nothing made sense, and everything, like, society seemed so, everything just seemed really pointless and random, and I just felt like, how am I ever going to like be a part of this and fit in? And then when I would read stories about Zen masters, it kind of seemed like they were just very present and alive and free, and I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. You know, I didn't feel like I understood anything about Buddhism, but something about Zen masters like really made sense to me. So that's why I like Zen a lot, and that got me into studying Buddhism in general, because I had a lot of emotional problems, a lot of like psychological issues, and Zen Buddhism in general, just like, it was one of the only things that I could like read, and I would feel like my blood pressure dropping. I would feel like my anxiety dropping, because it brought things back to like a very basic level, and it brought me into the present moment and took me out of all this like just spinning that I was doing in my mind, like all these like mental gymnastics that I was doing, and all these paranoias and fears that were not based on anything. And then Tibetan Buddhism later on I got into because of because of the tracker stuff, because I found that like I really like all these like indigenous cultures and their like connection with nature, and I really like Buddhism, and actually it kind of comes together nicely in Tibet.
How were you brought up? Were you brought up religious in any way, or?
My mom is Jewish and my dad was Catholic, and I was raised Catholic.
You were raised Catholic,
yeah.
So you were baptized and everything.
Yeah, confirmed, baptized, all
and
that.
you didn't feel a connection to that at all?
When I was little, I would pray every single night, and I would pray for like every single person that I knew by name.
Wow.
I would be like, God bless Joe and God bless Mary, like every single person that I know.
Notice that you chose Jesus'
that's funny.
father and
that's
mother.
Funny. Yeah, that's really funny. Did not even. Yeah, that was like too. I don't think I even knew anybody named Joe and Mary when I was a kid. It was really weird. But like every single relative of mine, every single friend of mine, by name, like no matter how long it took, it just came naturally. But I didn't feel religious. That was just like, I was like, oh, there's a guy called God who like lives in the sky and controls everything. Well, I'm gonna be cool with that guy. It was just like a decision of like.
Were your parents, I guess your father in this case, very strict on Christianity, or he not really? It was Catholicism.
It was like part of his like upbringing. So I think religion is more of a cultural thing for a lot of people. I don't think it's actually like something that they really like feel in their heart. They're just like, oh, this is what we do, and that's how it was with my dad. So, you go to church on Sunday, you go on Easter, all the major holidays. Catholics really are into saints, which is another good comparison to Buddhism, because Tibetan Buddhism, because they really love their masters and their siddhas and their monks and their bodhisattvas. They really love them.
It's really interesting. When I was in China, we went to the Lama Temple. We went to a bunch of temples. Actually, I don't think I went to the Lama Temple. We lived by the Lama Temple. But I went to a lot of Buddhist temples, and they always have all these Buddhas, if you will.
Like statues?
Statues. And it's also true of the Taoist temples. They also have like Taoist masters and stuff.
The immortals.
And people sort of, the immortals, I guess. I know more about Taoism as a philosophy than I do as a religion. So when it comes to the religion, I can't really talk much about it. I don't really know much about it. But I'll have somebody come in and talk to me about it a little bit. Segue.
Hey, we're gonna resume from here.
Yeah. Love it. I think there's something in there, and that's why.
That's why I
that's
didn't do it. Yeah.
You can pull it out. I think it's just a mouse.
I can pull it out. I'm gonna pull it out on radio, folks.
Always pull out. That's advice from the generalist. Tell me a little bit about the Native American stuff with Tom and tracking.
I had a friend who went to tracker school. I didn't know about tracker school until he told me about it. And it is a school out in New Jersey where you can go take classes to learn how to survive in the wilderness, but it's not like Navy SEALs military survival school. It's like, I don't want to use the word hippie because that's going to automatically bring up some kind of like picture.
Yeah, it brings up the wrong idea.
It's based on Native American stuff. The guy who started tracker school, Tom Brown, was trained by a Native American guy who also has a really, really interesting history. This Native American guy apparently wandered North and South America on foot so that he could. He had a vision. This is how the story goes, by the way.
This is Tom Brown. Or
this is his teacher, who he calls grandfather.
Okay.
Grandfather had a vision that he was supposed to travel North and South America and learn everything that he could about the old ways from every tribe that he could find. So he visited the Cherokee, the Paiute, the Hopi, the Navajo, the blah, 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 blah. Everybody. I'm like leaving out like 5,000 tribes, but whatever. I'm sorry. I don't know all the names. And in addition to that, he was also supposed to learn everything he could about every religion, philosophy, way of life that he could possibly find.
I love this guy.
He's a cool dude. Grandfather, I mean, no one's ever met Grandfather except for Tom. So there's a lot of people who think that Grandfather did not exist. It's a funny place, you know?
Interesting.
But great story either way. And so Grandfather did this, and then Grandfather's vision after that was that he was supposed to pass on all these things to this young man, this young white kid. And one day, in the wilds of New Jersey, in the Pine Barrens, which is a beautiful place, and everybody should go check it out, he came upon Tom, who was like just playing around in the woods. And like all of a sudden, it was like, you know, light bulb went on. This is the kid I'm supposed to teach all this to. And he taught everything to Tom. Him and Tom spent, this is when Tom was, I think, 7 or 8 years old. And so he spent 11 or 10 years teaching Tom all this stuff, you know. And Tom like sucked it up like a sponge. It was just like he loved it. And then from, I think, 18 to 28 or 30, Tom kind of just checked out of society and did the same thing that Grandfather did and just wandered North and South America on foot through the wilderness, surviving with the skills that Grandfather taught him.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't know that.
So yeah, in addition to like learning how to make like a shelter and fire and water and hunt and la, Grandfather also taught him all these spiritual skills, and that's a whole nother thing. I didn't learn a lot of that, the spiritual side of stuff. Tracker school to me was a bit culty.
Culty in the sense that the people in it were very culty, or that the teachings themselves were very culty?
No, the teachings themselves are not culty, but so on the one hand, it's a business, right? Tom Brown needs to make money.
Of course.
In order to keep his school open. So...
Because he needs to survive.
He calls it that he says that he's living his vision and not his dream. What that means is he is teaching people about this stuff because he believes that it's going to save the world, as opposed to his dream, which is to just not be part of society at all and go live in the woods, because that's like what he loves to do. So anyway, he is what they call a coyote teacher, which is somebody who teaches you often by messing with you and tricking you and being kind of like what most people would call a dick.
Oh, really?
I mean,
what most people would call
what most people would refer to as a jerk-off. I lived there for 4 months. I was an intern. I didn't stay the full 7 months because I started having anxiety attacks and panic attacks, and I really felt really out of place. But I have anxiety attacks and panic attacks all the time, so it doesn't mean anything about tracker school. So you should go there. Check it out. I actually fully believe that everybody should do at least the first.
I would absolutely love to, but you know that already.
I just think that it's like a really good antidote for people who feel kind of lost. Again, like a lot of people in Western society have this like very strong feeling that like something's wrong and that like they're missing something in their life, and they find a religion, or they find a cult, or they find some kind of like self-help whatever, and they like just latch onto it for dear life. I don't think that's good ever, whether it's like Zen, Christianity, tracker school, Eckhart Tolle, Tony Robbins.
Yeah, getting too
Yeah.
married to any one thing is you're losing the message and gaining the religion of it.
Yeah, it's
Where you get too attached to the little details of it and you forget the point of it.
Right, and this is why I say I'm comfortable calling myself a Buddhist, because I feel like fundamentally the things that make us suffer in life are attachment and aversion and ignorance. To me, that's like the most important teaching that Buddhism had to offer to me, was like avoid those three things, or at least be aware of when those three things are happening to you.
Right, that makes sense.
You know?
Because we do tend to get attached to things and we're like, no, we're this, or
Yeah.
it's this way or it's that way, when it could be many different ways. One of the great sayings that I've heard that I really enjoy it, there's many ways up the mountain, and all of them are right. The only one that's wrong is running around the mountain telling everybody else which is the right way over the mountain.
Yeah, that's I believe that's true. In Buddhism, they say, you know, actually I think it's a Zen saying. Zen is fall down 7 times, get up 8. There's no right, and I think the Karmapa said the only, or maybe it was Buddha himself, I don't know, some Buddhist so and so said there are only 2 things that you can do wrong on the path to enlightenment. One is not starting, and one is giving up.
I like that.
That's it.
That's some serious Beyonce shit right there.
I think Bay would agree. So, Buddhism. Okay, tracker school.
Yeah, we were on tracker school.
Yeah. So my friend went to this place and he was like, "Oh my God, you gotta go here. It's like unbelievable. Like everybody should live this way. Everyone needs to know about this. I can't believe it. Like that I didn't like people used to live this way and I didn't know about this." And I was always really into camping and being outdoors, and it sounded great to me. I mean, whatever. So I did a couple classes there, and it like really, it was really hard. It challenged me in a lot of ways that when I look back on it, like I feel like pretty embarrassed about. Yeah, so I did a couple classes there, and it felt to me like I can't believe that any human society ever gave up this lifestyle.
Really, that crazy. I mean, you've taught me a lot of stuff. I've gone out with you, and I mean minimal amounts, really.
Well, think of it this way, right? You know, in this Western society that we're in, you get up every day, you wake up with your alarm. You go to work, you have to be there a certain time. Especially in like a big city, you're beholden to like public transportation or the traffic, or you know what, maybe your iPhone doesn't ring and you don't wake up, or you just wake up and you're like, fuck, I don't want to go. All of these things. And then you go to work and maybe you like your job, maybe you don't. You're supposed to interact with a various cast of characters who you may or may not actually like. And then you come home at the end of the day and you open up your refrigerator and you pull food out of there that you got from a supermarket, or you call somebody up and they bring you food, and then you watch some TV and go to sleep, and then you do it again the next day. And it's a very like you're very disconnected from nature.
Yeah, 100%.
And this is why people like you and I get into Chinese medicine, because it's like you feel like it connects you more to like the rhythm of the universe.
Absolutely.
So and this is how indigenous cultures all lived. They woke up whenever they woke up. They went out, they looked for food, they found some food, they brought it home, they ate it, they hung out with their friends, they talked, they did whatever else they felt like doing, probably singing and dancing and fucking, and then they went back to sleep. And then they woke up the next day and did it again, and they just lived in harmony with the seasons. And why would you not want that? And I'm totally, completely romanticizing it 100%. There was like, you cannot live, again, back to Buddhism. There is suffering exists. You're going to experience it no matter what.
Of course, yeah. In any situation, you're gonna experience that. You're gonna have warring tribes. You're gonna have animals that come and eat your friends.
You want to marry this woman, but the guy over there who's a better hunter and has a bigger dick gets her, and whatever. Suffering exists. No culture is immune. So
let's be straight.
Right.
He has a much bigger dick.
His dick is way bigger.
He has a huge dick.
All of the dicks in the tribe. In fact, his name means
large penis.
He who has large penis.
It's actually large wood, but
great wood. So yeah, great wood is there, and he's fucking with your shit. In every
of course.
culture.
No matter what, you're gonna have some degree of suffering.
So at the time, I romanticized it a lot, But the reason I romanticize it is because a lot of that shit is missing from our lives now. We don't have a connection to nature. We don't wake up with the sun and go to bed when the sun goes down, and we don't sit around the fire and tell stories, and we don't go out, and we don't even know the names of the plants that we see every day on the way when we're walking to work.
One thing I heard that made me really sad is that any given child can name like 400 different brands
Yeah.
just by seeing the logo,
Mhm.
but they can't name 3 different trees
Right.
or 3 different plants.
Correct. Yeah. And they did some other study where like they would ask kids like, where does milk come from? And they would be like, the store.
Oh God.
Yeah. I mean, it's
I mean, they'll grow up and they'll figure it out, but still, I hear that.
one of Tom Brown's like major proteges, this guy John Young, who Tom met when he was a young kid, who has his own school out west, which is supposedly really great. He calls it nature deficiency disorder. So it's like, you know, he believes that a lot of the problems we have as a society are because of that, because we're not in touch with nature at all.
Not only are we not in touch with nature, we're entirely removed from it.
Right.
You don't, I mean, you have a couple of trees on the street, but if you're living in a city, you don't get nature.
Yeah.
Different in like suburban and even especially rural areas.
And you can see it in the way that people are like, it's too hot, or it's raining, or it's snowing. And it's like, that's not really like a thing in traditional cultures. It's just, it is what it is. It's raining, it's snowing, it's sunny. It's like, that's nature, that's the weather.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
Although I imagine they got their little complaints there too.
Yeah, but they knew that, like, you can't have you can't have summer without winter, and you can't have spring without fall, and you can't have the harvest without planting. And like,
Yeah, they
they
also
knew that
didn't
these
have-
cycles were important.
Right. They also didn't have the heating and cooling that we do that lets us be like, oh, it's cold outside, but let's be warm.
Mm-hmm. They had the fire.
Right, that's true.
Or they had, their shelters, which they collected the materials for by hand and then built. You know what I mean? So they were connected to all of these. Everything that was keeping them alive, they were super connected to.
Yeah, we're extremely removed from that.
Right.
I just saw a video recently about making dairy and how they treat the cows, and I swear I almost went vegetarian.
Oh, that happened to me when I was in my early 20s. I saw some PETA videos and I was like,
Yeah.
That's it for me. And eventually I couldn't do it anymore because not eating meat resulted in me being like fatigued to the point of like not being able to stand up. But it's disgusting. It's like, and it's brutal, and it's.
Yeah, my thought is everyone should, at some point in their lives, hunt their own meat.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that sounds shitty, and not hunt for sport. I'm not a big fan of the idea of hunting for sport. But the idea of understanding where your food is coming from, what you're going through. And also when you kill an animal that is in the wild, that you kill for food, that animal got to live a full life. And that's a little bit nicer than an animal that's bred for eating or impregnated forever so that they can produce milk.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I don't think there's anything weird about thinking that people should go out there and see what it's like to like hunt an animal, because I think a lot of indigenous cultures would probably say that like you don't deserve to eat an animal unless you can kill it and catch it. And if you do kill it and catch it and eat it, then you did deserve it. And that animal they understand that cycle,
Right, they live in that cycle on a constant basis, whether we're involved or not.
I'm not saying the animal like wants to die or is happy that you killed it, but like it's the order.
I mean, the argument that was given to me one time by somebody, and I don't think it's a fair argument, they're like, oh, well, you can say that about anything. You shouldn't sit on a chair unless you make your own chair. Well, I don't think that's necessarily a fair comparison.
It's not that you shouldn't sit in the chair. It's that if you did make that chair, you'll appreciate that chair a fuck ton more than if you just buy it in IKEA.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not about like, oh, you don't even deserve that chair. You see this a lot with people who are really wealthy versus people who are not, is that people who are not wealthy tend to appreciate the things that they have a lot more, and people who are super rich feel like they should just, and this is not me like shitting on rich people, by the way, there are plenty of cool rich people in the world, it's just that it's easy to be rich and just be like, feel like you are owed things.
Yeah.
Like even us, like you and me, like we're not poor, but we're not like,
technically speaking.
well, no, we are kind of poor. All right, fine, we're poor. But we haven't lived like lives of what people would consider like poverty.
Yeah, no, we haven't. The thing is, I like to say we're sort of new poor, in the sense that we haven't grown up in poverty. We haven't grown. But
we're doing our damnedest to get there.
we don't have the setbacks that people who are born to poverty have.
Right.
We have help perhaps from our elders and other people around, because we grew up in a situation where the people around us weren't necessarily poor. I don't consider myself poor in that sense really either, because even though I don't have a lot of money and I basically live from paycheck to paycheck, give or take, I have an out And a lot of times, to me, the idea of poverty is that not only are you having that hard time making money, but there's no out available to you, and it's a very tough life.
Yeah, you really are forced into one of a few occupations, and
your education is not as good. You don't have the opportunities.
Both poverty and both extreme poverty and extreme wealth breed similar mentalities.
How do you mean?
I guess it comes down to attachment again. If you grow up with a certain lifestyle, like an opulent lifestyle, you become attached to it, you become used to it, and you will pretty much, anything that you do to keep that lifestyle, you feel is justified. And if you grow up really poor, you feel like, listen, this is the life I was given and I need to survive, so anything that I need to do to survive is understandable. And so it breeds this kind of
I hear what you're
survivalist
saying.
mentality. So it's
you get to see that a lot in opposites to the extremes.
Yeah.
For example,
yin becoming yang.
The extreme leftist political view versus the extreme right political view, they end up being almost exactly the same thing.
Yeah, they're either
it's kind of the yin and yang.
Yeah, they're either super fascist or super what would be
communist,
I
guess.
Yeah. They're really extreme.
But ultimately, they're communist in theory, but in practice, they're something else entirely.
Again, this is why I feel comfortable calling myself a Buddhist, because Buddhism calls itself the middle way, and the truth very rarely lies in an extreme point of view. It lies in some sort of gray area.
I agree with you.
Which takes a lot of meditation to understand, a lot of sitting with things until the answer becomes clear on its own.
So let me ask you this, because I'm actually interested. Not that I wasn't interested in all the other shit.
Because I'm actually interested in this. It all comes out. This is the whole point.
As far as meditation goes, what is your way of meditation, or your technique, or is there no technique to be had, or is me asking that not okay?
I don't know why that would not be okay.
You never know, man.
How dare you ask how to meditate? You son of a bitch. There's a million ways to meditate, and I think a lot of what people do these days, it's not meditating. It's almost like self-hypnosis.
Tell me more.
A lot of people, they want to conjure up, they like to do affirmations, they like to conjure up scenes of things that they want, and that may be relaxing, and it may feel good, but that doesn't make it meditating. Meditation, from a Buddhist point of view, there are still different kinds. Different schools of Buddhism have slightly different forms of meditation. Meditating with your eyes open. Meditating with your eyes closed. These are actually differences that mean something to different sects of Buddhism. But the kind of meditation that Buddha was talking about when you say meditating, because even Christian mystics had meditation, and it might have been different. I don't know. But Buddhist meditation there are different levels of it, but it starts with mindfulness awareness meditation, which I think in Tibetan is called, or I don't even know if this is Tibetan. This might be Sanskrit. It's called shamatha vipassana.
That sounds like Sanskrit.
I don't think it's Tibetan. And that involves basically being in the present moment. You sit, you put your body in a sitting posture, and in the version I was taught, you have your eyes open, and you focus on your breath. You pay attention. You put they say put 25% of your attention on your breath. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure how to divide up my attention.
You just gotta work on the math while you're sitting there.
I don't really know how to do that.
72 plus 31.
Yeah, carry the 2.
Multiply by 100. Oh shit, that's 26% of my attention. I have to start again.
Yeah, no, you fucked up. You can't. Yeah. So, and then the rest of your attention is just kind of you leave it open. And, the way that the mind works, it naturally wanders somewhere. And then at some point you realize, oh shit, my mind wandered away. And then you bring it back. And you say to yourself, thinking. It's you label it. But you do all this in a way that's not judgmental.
Not self-judgmental, you mean?
You're not damn you, you were thinking, you suck at meditating, you son of a bitch. It's you just go, oh, I was thinking.
Did you just break your phone?
No.
Okay, go on.
There was Pema Chodron talks about somebody she taught meditating who, when she talks about doing the thinking, the labeling with in a friendly way, he would say to himself, "Thinking good, buddy." It was almost reminds me of a trucker on a CB, oh, thinking good, buddy. But it's like you're trying to be like friendly with it. You're like, oh, you were thinking. It's not like, it's not this harsh kind of like, whoosh, like you're not whipping yourself for thinking. You're just like noticing that you're thinking, and then you bring it back. So it's just this kind of continual, like, oh, I was somewhere else, and then you bring your attention back to the present moment. Because if you sit there for long enough, you'll be like, what do I want to eat tonight? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, of course, that happens to me when I try to meditate.
I need to go food shopping. Well, this is why people think that they're quote unquote bad at meditating, but that's literally the entire point of meditating, is just to notice those things.
Yeah, that was me for a very long time until I got more into this and started learning more about this. I'm like, I'm horrible at meditating until I realized I'm doing it.
Everybody is literally everyone is horrible at meditating. I mean, if you meditate for years and years and years every day, you'll get better at it, but you're still going to have moments where you're like, oh, I was somewhere else. Like I was thinking about Christmas. I was thinking about having to take a shit. It's just like stuff comes in your mind. But then you say, oh, thinking, and you come back to the present moment. And that's all meditating is. You just keep bringing yourself back. And the more you do that, the more you gain control over your awareness. And you can decide what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. And you can see the things that are going on inside of your own mind. And you can realize your patterns. And that's how you break karmic cycles. That's how you break karmic patterns, is you become aware of them. Everybody goes through these things. You have beliefs or ideas in your head, and then you realize that they are faulty, and you just stop. You just say, oh, that's wrong, and you stop believing it, you stop thinking it.
So I agree with you theoretically, but practically I feel like there's a lot of people who are like, you can't control your mind. You shouldn't try to control your mind even, but rather you should just let it be and be okay with it. What do you say to that?
That is what I'm saying.
That's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't try to control your mind. You should just become aware of your mind. And the more aware you become of your mind, the less neurotic you become. You just see the patterns that you're stuck in. And you're like, oh, why did I think that was so important? Or why did I feel like I needed to do that or think that or be that? And you just let it go. And all of those things are they're all like ideas that you have that come from somewhere that are telling you this is what you have to do, this is how you have to be, this is how life has to be. And all those things are doing are keeping you out of the present moment. And that's the entire point, is to just be here right now. That's why in Zen they say, okay, I wish I could remember these quotes like word for word, but I'm like going off of memory. But like
paraphrase, that's okay.
Like when Zen is chopping wood and carrying water, or when you're chopping wood, chop wood. When you're carrying water. Or Buddha said, in the listening there is only listening, and in the tasting there is only tasting, or something. It's like you're not adding an extra layer on something. It's
right,
like,
you're not adding all your interpretation.
And all the dialogue of like, oh, this reminds me of when I was a kid. No. You just
the best time for me ever, I wasn't meditating per se, but I would like to call it a meditative state, was when I was in a particular situation where the mind chatter just disappeared.
Stopped, yeah.
It was just me being me. I wasn't thinking about what's going to happen. I wasn't thinking about what has happened. I was just being me, and I wasn't talking to myself. And that was a pretty unbelievable moment for me. So yeah, I guess that's sort of what you're talking about when you say meditation.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
That's
Zen. That's it. That's all it is. All Buddhism is a way to figure out how to make that your entire reality.
I would not say I'm there yet, but
very, very few people are.
Of course.
Yeah. And so when we were talking about like a stream enterer, somebody who's like on the way and like can't be stopped, like that's somebody who they've built up enough momentum, they've gotten so good at it that there's no stopping this like train of like continual awareness. If you can imagine like a bar graph of like unawareness versus awareness, and we all start off with like super low awareness, super high unawareness, and the more you meditate, the more they start to go even out, and then once they reach a middle point, and then once awareness is greater than unawareness, there's no stopping it. It just keeps going, and then eventually like your karma is wiped out, and all those discursive thoughts are gone, and you're just here, and there's nothing else.
That's awesome. I think this is a great place to end this. A great place to end
this. This is a great place.
This is a great place to end this. This is a great place to end this. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. First episode. Good man.
Thank you so much.
This is the Generalist.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, and it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. It was so much fun to not film. We don't film this, but it was so much fun to record this. It's our first time doing a recording. I apologize for any quality issues. It is our first time. It's only going to get better and better from here. If you like the show, donate $1. Go to our website to check it out, www.thegeneralistpodcast.com. If you liked it, also please rate us on iTunes. We will continue to make the podcast better and better as we go. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Daniel Flagging for being our first guest. It was so much fun to have him here. Keep listening and enjoy. And send me your emails at thegeneralistpodcast@gmail.com, etc., etc. Have a good night. Or day if you're listening to this in the day. You shouldn't be listening to this in the day. What are you doing even? Whatever. Here are some bits that I edited out that I thought were a little bit funny. Not crazy funny, but, you know, whatever. Enjoy.
You're gonna have to. I mean, if I'm gonna be on this,
No, burp away. First of all, I could edit it out, or second of all, I could not.
I'm editing my burps out.
All right, you can keep the burps.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Dan's Gas.
I have a lot of gas.
Thank you.
My girlfriend will be really happy to hear this on the podcast. She wants to suffer through my.
Well, now everybody does.
Yeah.
Or at least anybody who listens to this. I totally forgot what I was going to say.
Brought to you by.
Okay. I was thinking of doing a podcast called The Scotsman, where it's done by me, and I'm not Scottish, and I just go, "Welcome to The Scotsman, it's great to have you here."
That's like probably more than 15 seasons of Star Trek.
Give me a week. The mouse is not working. Fuck it. This is not ending. Here, I have a second mouse. One that's actually connected to the computer.
Mouse number 2.